Hello, I'm continuing my Superman reviews with Superman Returns. Now, Superman Returns came out in 2006, and the film is co-written and directed by Bryan Singer. Now, before this, Bryan Singer directed the first two X-Men movies, and he also directed the 1998 Stephen King adaptation, Apt Pupil. The film is also co-written by Michael Dougherty. I'm not sure if I'm saying his last name right. Now, after this, Michael Dougherty would go on to direct the 2007 anthology horror film Trick or Treat, and he also recently directed the 2015 horror comedy film Krampus. He also co-wrote X-Men Apocalypse, and apparently he's also going to be writing and directing the 2019 Godzilla film, Godzilla King of Monsters, which is the sequel to the 2014 American reboot of Godzilla. Now, prior to this movie coming out, they've been talking about doing another Superman movie for years, after Superman 4 more or less killed the franchise, at least as far as movies are concerned. But in the 1990s, you had the TV series Lois and Clark, and then you had the animated Superman series, and in the early 2000s you had the series Smallville, which really, I think, kind of boosted Superman's popularity again, so it was inevitable that they would eventually make another Superman movie. Now, they actually were going to do another live-action Superman movie in the late 1990s, and it was going to be Superman Lives, and this was actually going to have Nicolas Cage in it as Superman, and the film was going to be directed by Tim Burton, and I believe Kevin Smith also wrote the script for it, and this was actually going to happen too, and they actually shot some stills for the movie, but for one reason or another, the project pretty much bit the dust, and they recently did a documentary about the death of this film project, Superman Lives, and it was called The Death of Superman Lives. But from everything I've heard about the Superman Lives project that they were going to do, it sounds like it was either going to be the greatest Superman movie ever, or one of the worst pieces of shit ever made, because the producer of the movie wanted them to do some pretty stupid shit for the movie, honestly. Also, I think, I could be wrong on this, but I think there were also talks of doing another Superman movie in the early 2000s, and I could be wrong on this, but I remember hearing them actually mention that Keanu Reeves was going to play Superman, and I actually do like Keanu Reeves, but I'm not sure how he would have done as Superman, though. But once again, in 2006, following the success of the TV series Smallville, we got this movie. Now, this film is actually in continuity with the Christopher Reeve Superman movies, although obviously in this movie, Superman is not played by Christopher Reeve. In the film, Superman is played by Brendan Routh. Now, Superman Returns, there are people who do love this movie, but then there are people who absolutely despise this movie to the core. I'm kind of in between on this movie. I really don't think the film is that bad, and there is a lot about this film that I do like, but overall, I think the film is kind of dull and kind of forgettable, at least in my opinion. Now, I remember when this movie came out, and I remember seeing it on TV. Like, I didn't see it in the theaters, but I saw it on, like, TV, or I think my family rented it from Blockbuster shortly after it came out on DVD, and I remember seeing it as a kid, and I remember really fucking hating this movie. I remember finding it to be just boring as shit. Now that I'm a little more mature, and I use mature in quotes, but now that I'm an adult, or at least a young adult, I think I could appreciate this movie a little bit more, and I do like how this movie is trying to be much more of a character drama. Now, there was definitely a lot of character drama in the first two Superman movies, but there was also a lot of humor in those films and a lot of comedy in those films. This film really does downplay the comedy, and it's pretty much a straight-laced character drama. And I actually kind of liked that. I liked how this was a lot more character-driven. I liked how this has a very dark tone. Now, this was coming out right after Batman Begins, which started the whole trend of the really dark superhero movie, which could be good or bad. But in this film, I could see why people didn't like the dark tone of this film. At the same time, I had no problem with it. My only problem with this movie, though, is I do think it's overlong, and I normally don't criticize movies for being long. Like, if there's story to tell, then there might be a reason why a film is so long. With this, I personally think the film is overlong. It does drag out a little bit, and once again, I don't normally make criticisms like that, and it is a little dull, and ultimately, I do think it's kind of forgettable. Like, once again, there are a lot of things about this film that I do like, but I rewatched the film for this review, but I'm not sure if I'll ever rewatch this film again. I'm really not. Like, this was never one of my favorite Superman movies, and once again, it's just kind of a dull movie. I see what they were going for, like, I see what Bryan Singer was going for with this movie, and I do respect it, but at the same time, I just find it to be kind of forgettable. But really, that's my only problem with the film. Other than that, though, I don't think the film is that bad, with the exception of some pretty obvious CGI effects that are in this movie. Now, I do want to state, though, that this film is in continuity with Superman and Superman 2, but it ignores the continuity of Superman 3 and Superman 4, and I'm assuming it's also ignoring the continuity of Supergirl, which was originally in continuity with the Christopher Reeve Superman movies. So the film tries to be a direct sequel to Superman 2. The only problem with that, though, is Superman and Superman 2 were clearly set in the 70s when that movie came out, or when those movies came out. Well, Superman 2 came out in 1980, but you know what I mean. They were clearly set in the late 70s. This film is clearly set in present time, yet continuity-wise, this film is supposed to take place only like 5 years after the events of Superman and Superman 2, yet it's clearly set in 2006, while the old Superman movies were clearly set in the 1970s, so they're definitely retconning the time setting. Now, the plot of Superman Returns is apparently sometime after the events of Superman 2. Astronomers found what they thought was the remains of Krypton, so Superman actually left Earth to look for what's left of his home planet, and what happens is apparently he was gone for 5 years, but now he has come back to Earth, and a lot of the film focuses on how the world is reacting to Superman Returns, and it also focuses on how people who knew Superman are reacting to Superman returning. But in the film, Lex Luthor, who has gotten out of jail a few years prior to the events of this film, I'm not even sure if it was a few years prior to the events of this film, because apparently you find out he was in jail for 5 years, so he was in jail for the span of time that was happening between Superman 2 and this, and basically, Lex Luthor, he's gotten out of jail, and now Lex Luthor's plan is he goes back to the Fortress of Solitude, which he previously was at in Superman 2, and he discovers that the crystals from Krypton can apparently grow with water, and what happens is he's planning on using this to literally create another continent, but of course if he does this, this would have severe environmental effects, like it would pretty much put half of America underwater and kill millions, perhaps billions of people, but he doesn't care. All he sees is an opportunity to make money off the land that he would create, and basically when he does this, and he doesn't do this till towards the end, he puts the crystal in a piece of kryptonite, so this new continent that grows is also fused with kryptonite, so Superman can't really go on it. And eventually Lois Lane is the one who finds out about what Lex Luthor is up to, and she inevitably gets held hostage by Lex Luthor, and long story short, Superman goes to try to stop Lex Luthor, but of course, this new continent that Lex Luthor is literally growing is also made of kryptonite, so it weakens Superman's powers. And in the film, you find out that in the 5 years since Superman has been gone, Lois has been in a romantic relationship with this guy named Richard, who is actually the nephew of Perry White, and basically there's kind of a love triangle thing going on between Clark Kent / Superman and this guy named Richard, and apparently Lois and Richard also had a son in these years, but spoiler, you find out that this son is actually the illegitimate child of Superman, so you find out at the end that this child has Superman's powers. So overall, I would say what I liked about the movie was, I liked how the film was trying to be much more of a character drama, trying to be much more of a character-driven film, and I actually liked the dark tone of the film, even though I can understand why it didn't work for some people. Now, the acting in the film is definitely hit or miss. I wouldn't say there's any bad performances in the film. Like Brendan Rolfe, who plays Superman in the film, he does do a good job, but the thing about it, though, is he's definitely trying to channel Christopher Reeve's performance as Superman, which makes sense because this is set in the same continuity as those movies, so it's technically the same version of the character that we saw in the first two movies. And it makes sense that Brendan Rolfe would be channeling Christopher Reeves in his performance, but I feel like, I don't know, I feel like Christopher Reeve had something that Brendan Rolfe doesn't, and I can't really put my finger on it, and it wasn't a bad performance by any means. It's just, I feel like, I don't know, I feel like he tried too hard to be Christopher Reeve, and he didn't succeed at being Christopher Reeve, in my opinion. In the movie, Kate Bosworth plays Lois Lane, and once again, it was not a bad performance, but my problem with it, though, is she's playing the same version of the character that Margot Kidder played in the older Superman movies, yet there's nothing about her performance that is even remotely like the way Margot Kidder played this character in the older films. In the film, Frank Langella plays Perry White, and I have to say that that was pretty dead-on casting. And I would say probably the best performance in the film is Kevin Spacey as Lex Luthor, and he's definitely channeling Gene Hackman, which makes sense because it's the same version of the character that we saw in the Richard Donner films, but the thing about it, though, is he plays Lex Luthor like Gene Hackman did for a little bit, but then he kind of takes on a whole new Lex Luthor personality, and he plays him as, like, he's honestly really freaking threatening as Lex Luthor, and really kind of scary as this character, and he kind of plays the character almost completely differently. Like, he eventually starts playing the character completely differently than Gene Hackman played him in the Richard Donner films, and I actually kind of liked that, though, because I had some issues with Lex Luthor in the older films, and I kind of liked how he was much more of an evil person, or came off as much more evil in this. So overall, I have mixed feelings on the acting in the film, but overall I would not say that there was a bad performance in this film, with the exception of maybe the little kid. And once again, there was a lot that I liked about this movie. Like, it's clear that Bryan Singer really loved the Richard Donner Superman films, and this is definitely a tribute to those, even though, I mean, it's also meant to be a sequel to those as well, but it comes off as almost more of an homage than a full-fledged sequel, because once again, they do kind of retcon certain things. But there were also things I feel like they could have touched on a little bit more. For example, when Superman comes back, he kind of sees, like, how bad the world is without him. Like, he's watching the news and he sees shit about wars and stuff like that, and I feel like they could have touched on something where maybe he's starting to wonder, like, is the world this bad because I've been gone for this long, and was it selfish of me to leave Earth like that? So they could have touched on certain things like that, but they really don't, and once again, there are things in this film that they kind of touched on, but they don't follow through with it. Also, I feel like Lex Luthor's diabolical plan in this film is honestly kind of stupid. And overall, the film has its problems, but I also don't think it's that bad. I just think the film is kind of bland and kind of forgettable, while there is a lot about the film that I do like. Overall, I have mixed feelings on this film, and I can't say that, honestly, this is a love-hate kind of movie. Some people are gonna love it, and some people are gonna hate it, and I'm not really sure if I can recommend this. I can recommend it for the right kind of person, but I'm not sure. I mean, once again, I kind of have mixed feelings on this film, and I rewatched it to do this review, but I'm not sure if I'm ever going to watch it again. But yeah, that was my review on Superman Returns, and bye.